On the night of March 18, 1990, two men dressed as police officers knocked on the door of one of Boston's most prestigious museums. 81 minutes later, they were gone, and so was $500 million worth of art. The paintings have never been recovered, the thieves have never been identified, and the empty frames still hang on the museum walls today, exactly where the paintings used to be. At exactly 1:24 a.m., two men dressed as Boston police officers approached the side entrance of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Inside the museum, security guard Rick Abath sat behind the desk, listening to music and staring at security monitors that flickered with black and white camera feeds. St. Patrick's Day celebrations had flooded Boston with drunken crowds all night. Officers moving through the streets wasn't unusual, but these men weren't police officers. And within the next 81 minutes, they would carry out the largest art theft in modern history. 13 priceless works of art would vanish into the darkness. Paintings by Rembrandt, sketches by Degas, a Vermeer masterpiece, artifacts impossible to replace. The estimated value would eventually climb beyond $500 million. Yet more than 3 decades later, not a single piece has been recovered. No one has ever been charged, and the empty frames still hang inside the museum, waiting, like ghosts. Long before the robbery became international legend, the museum itself was already unusual. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was unlike any other museum in America. It wasn't designed to feel cold or sterile, it felt alive. The building stood in Boston's Fenway neighborhood like a Venetian palace transported across the Atlantic Ocean brick by brick. Its creator, Isabella Stewart Gardner, had poured her obsession into every inch of it. Born in 1840 into immense wealth, Isabella was known for being eccentric, brilliant, and fiercely independent. At a time when society expected wealthy women to remain quiet and decorative, Isabella traveled the world, collecting art with unstoppable intensity. She bought paintings, sculptures, tapestries, rare books, furniture, and artifacts from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Every object carried a story. Every room became a carefully staged experience. She wasn't building a museum, she was building immortality. When the museum opened in 1903, visitors stepped into a dreamlike maze of candlelit galleries, towering ceilings, hidden balconies, and indoor gardens. Masterpieces by Titian, Raphael, Botticelli, and Rembrandt lined the walls. But Isabella imposed one strange rule before her death. Nothing could ever be moved. The arrangement of every room had to remain exactly as she designed it, forever. If anyone altered the placement of the artwork, the museum could lose its endowment. That decision would later become painfully important, because after the robbery, the museum could not replace the stolen masterpieces with copies. Instead, the empty frames remained, a permanent wound. Boston in 1990 carried two personalities. By day, it was a city of universities, history, and wealth. By night, another world emerged. Organized crime still held influence across parts of the city. Irish mobsters, Italian mafia crews, drug traffickers, armed robbers, violent gangs. The FBI spent years monitoring criminal networks tied to art theft, drug distribution, and racketeering. And during the late 1980s, art theft was becoming increasingly attractive to criminals. Unlike stolen cash, artwork couldn't easily be spent. But masterpieces held enormous value in the underworld. A stolen painting could become bargaining currency, collateral, leverage, a hidden insurance policy. Criminal organizations sometimes traded art privately between wealthy collectors or used it to negotiate reduced prison sentences. And museums across the United States often relied on shockingly weak security. The Gardner Museum was no exception. Despite containing hundreds of millions of dollars in artwork, its overnight security was dangerously vulnerable. The museum had motion detectors, a handful of cameras, 2 guards, and almost no real protection against a determined intruder. It was the perfect target. 23-year-old Rick Abath wasn't a hardened security professional. He was a musician. Like many overnight guards at museums during the era, the job was quiet and flexible, perfect for artists trying to survive. That night, Rick worked alongside another guard named Randy Heston. The shift had been uneventful. Outside, Boston's St. Patrick's Day chaos slowly calmed as bars emptied and exhausted partygoers stumbled home. Inside the museum, silence settled over the galleries. The only sounds came from ventilation systems and the occasional creak of ancient floors. At approximately 1:20 a.m., Rick noticed something strange. A car had stopped outside the employee entrance. Moments later, a buzzer sounded. 2 police officers stood at the door. One officer explained they were responding to a disturbance call. Rick hesitated. Museum policy strictly prohibited opening the door to anyone after hours, but the officers sounded calm, professional. One of them told Rick he looked familiar, then said there might be a warrant for his arrest. It sounded bizarre, but Rick stepped away from protocol and unlocked the door. The moment the men entered, everything changed. The fake officers crossed the threshold slowly. One appeared taller and older. The other looked younger. Both wore mustaches. Both carried authority effortlessly. Then one of them said the words that would become infamous. "Gentlemen, this is a robbery." Rick froze. The men immediately pushed him against the wall. They handcuffed him, duct taped his head and eyes. Then they summoned Randy from another part of the museum. Randy approached cautiously. The instant he saw the scene, he realized the truth. The guards were outmatched. Within minutes, both men were restrained in the basement. The thieves told them, "Don't give us any trouble and you'll be fine." Then the robbers disappeared into the dark museum. What happened next remains one of the most mysterious criminal operations ever executed. Because, despite the enormous value of the collection, the thieves behaved strangely. They ignored certain masterpieces worth tens of millions. They stole other objects with relatively modest value. Some pieces were violently removed, others were carefully handled. It suggested something chilling. The robbers either knew exactly what they wanted, or they had no idea what they were doing. The thieves first entered the Dutch room. This gallery contained some of the museum's most valuable paintings. Masterpieces by Rembrandt hung quietly beneath dim lighting. The robbers approached Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. The painting was extraordinary. Completed in 1633, it depicted terrified disciples battling violent waves as Jesus stood aboard a ship during a biblical storm. It was Rembrandt's only known seascape, one of a kind. The thieves sliced it from its frame. Not carefully, not professionally. The canvas was cut with brutal force. Nearby hung A Lady and Gentleman in Black, another Rembrandt. That painting vanished too. Then they stole a tiny self-portrait etching by Rembrandt. But one theft baffled investigators. The robbers removed a Chinese bronze beaker from a table. The object was centuries old, but compared to the surrounding artwork, it seemed random. Why take it? No one could explain. The thieves also attempted to steal a Rembrandt flag piece, but abandoned it midway. Investigators later believed the painting may have been too large to transport quickly. Yet the strangest theft in the Dutch room was still ahead, because hanging nearby was a small painting by Johannes Vermeer. The concert. Today, experts estimate it may be the single most valuable unrecovered painting in the world. Only around 34 Vermeer paintings are known to exist, and the thieves took one of them. The painting showed 3 musicians gathered in a softly lit room. Quiet, elegant, almost intimate. The thieves cut it from its frame and vanished deeper into the museum. The robbers moved upstairs toward the short gallery. Here, their behavior became even stranger. Motion sensors recorded movement. But investigators later discovered the thieves appeared uncertain. They entered rooms, left, returned, spent unusual amounts of time deciding what to take. One of the objects stolen was an ancient Chinese bronze finial shaped like an eagle. Again, seemingly random. Then came 5 sketches by Degas. The drawings were delicate works on paper, smaller, easy to transport, unlike the giant canvases downstairs. The thieves also stole a Napoleonic finial. Then they removed Edouard Manet's Chez Tortoni. The painting depicted a sharply dressed man seated at a cafe table. Elegant, refined. It was one of the last works taken. But investigators would later discover something deeply disturbing. The thieves spent over an hour inside the museum, an eternity for professional criminals. They moved without urgency, without fear, as if they knew no police response was coming. At approximately 2:45 a.m., the thieves left. They carried 13 stolen objects into the night, then disappeared. No alarms had alerted police, no patrol units intercepted them, no witnesses stopped them. Down in the basement, the 2 bound guards waited helplessly in darkness. Hours passed. At 8:15 a.m., the next shift arrived. The museum doors remained locked. Nobody answered. Eventually, security personnel contacted police. Officers entered the building and discovered the tied-up guards. Then they saw the empty frames. At first, investigators struggled to comprehend the scale of the crime. This wasn't a burglary. It was a cultural catastrophe. The missing art wasn't simply expensive. It was irreplaceable. News spread across the world within hours. Television networks interrupted broadcasts. Newspapers printed photographs of the stolen works. The FBI soon became involved, and the mystery officially began. Investigators immediately faced problems. The crime scene was confusing. The thieves left surprisingly little physical evidence. No clear fingerprints, no weapon, no obvious getaway vehicle. The museum's security system itself became a focus of scrutiny. How had the thieves known exactly how vulnerable the museum was? Why choose St. Patrick's Day night? Did they conduct surveillance beforehand? Was it an inside job? Suspicion quickly turned toward the guards, particularly Rick Abath. Why had he violated protocol and opened the door? Why had he earlier opened a side door briefly during his shift? Rick insisted he had done nothing intentional. He claimed he had been checking outside after hearing noise. Investigators administered polygraph tests. The guards cooperated extensively, but public suspicion never fully disappeared. Still, no evidence directly connected either guard to the theft. And despite decades of investigation, no charges were ever filed against them. The FBI eventually concluded the guards were likely not masterminds. But questions remained. Could the thieves have received inside information from someone connected to the museum? No one knew. The stolen objects included Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, Rembrandt's A Lady and Gentleman in Black, Rembrandt's self-portrait etching 5 Degas sketches, Manet's Che Tortoni, ancient Chinese artifacts, decorative finials. Together, the theft shattered records. The estimated value eventually exceeded $500 million. But experts believed the cultural loss was even greater. Certain works simply cannot be recreated. Vermeer paintings are extraordinarily rare. Rembrandt's stolen seascape was unique. These weren't replaceable luxury items. They were fragments of human history, and somehow they had vanished. Almost immediately, theories exploded. Some investigators believed the robbers were local criminals hired by a larger organization. Others suspected the mafia. Certain experts believed the paintings had already left the United States. One theory claimed wealthy secret collectors commissioned the theft. But art experts doubted this. Displaying famous stolen paintings would be nearly impossible. Anyone attempting to sell them openly would instantly attract law enforcement. Instead, investigators increasingly focused on organized crime. The FBI eventually centered attention on Boston mob figures connected to drug trafficking and armed robbery. Names surfaced repeatedly: career criminals, informants, gang associates. Some were linked to Irish mob networks, others to New England mafia operations. Yet every promising lead eventually collapsed. Witnesses died, suspects disappeared, evidence evaporated. The case became a maze. To understand the mystery, investigators studied how stolen artwork functions inside criminal networks. Unlike jewelry or cash, stolen masterpieces are nearly impossible to sell legally. But that doesn't make them useless. High-profile stolen art can become criminal currency, a bargaining chip, something hidden for years. Sometimes criminals use stolen art as collateral in drug deals. Other times they attempt to trade information about artwork in exchange for reduced prison sentences. This theory gained traction in the Gardner case. Perhaps the thieves never intended to sell the paintings publicly. Perhaps the artwork was meant to move quietly between criminal hands, hidden in warehouses, safe houses, basements, or shipping containers. Yet as years passed, one troubling question emerged. If organized criminals possessed the paintings, why hadn't they surfaced? The FBI devoted enormous resources to the case. Agents chased leads across the United States and Europe. Informants provided fragments of information. Prison inmates claimed knowledge. Undercover operations attempted to lure suspects into negotiations. At times, investigators believed they were incredibly close. Then the trail would vanish again. One significant lead pointed toward Connecticut mobster Robert Gentile. Authorities searched his property extensively. Investigators believed he may have known where the paintings had once been hidden, but no artwork was recovered. Other suspects included notorious Boston area criminals connected to art theft rings. Several reportedly bragged privately about involvement, but many died before investigators could obtain definitive evidence. The deeper agents dug, the murkier the story became. The robbery increasingly appeared connected to a network of career criminals rather than sophisticated art experts. Yet the thieves had still succeeded. Completely. Most museums would replace stolen artwork with replicas. The Gardner Museum refused. Because Isabella Stewart Gardner's original arrangement could not legally be altered. So the empty frames stayed on the walls. Visitors still walk through the Dutch Room today and see them. Large, vacant rectangles hanging in silence. The absence feels haunting, almost sacred. The empty frames transformed the robbery into something larger than theft. It became a permanent scar, a visible reminder that something beautiful had been violently removed from history. Museum staff sometimes describe the missing paintings as family members who never came home. And after decades, hope remains strangely alive. Because unlike destroyed art, stolen art can reappear. Somewhere, someday, one of the greatest mysteries involves the thieves themselves. Were they highly organized professionals or reckless criminals who got lucky? Evidence supports both possibilities. On one hand, the robbery exploited security weaknesses perfectly. The thieves arrived during a chaotic holiday. They disguised themselves convincingly. They neutralized the guards quickly. They escaped cleanly. No witnesses identified them. No arrests followed. That suggests planning, discipline, experience. But other details suggest amateur behavior. The thieves damaged paintings unnecessarily, ignored even more valuable artwork nearby, took odd objects seemingly at random, spent too much time inside, and failed to steal certain masterpieces that would have been easier to transport. Investigators began theorizing that the robbers themselves may not have fully understood art. Instead, perhaps someone gave them a shopping list. A middleman, a criminal broker, someone who understood which paintings carried value in underground circles. If true, that person has never been identified publicly. Over the decades, countless rumors surfaced. Some claimed the paintings were hidden in Ireland. Others suggested they moved through Philadelphia crime families. There were stories of secret storage lockers, abandoned warehouses, buried containers, even whispers that some works were destroyed accidentally. Occasionally, investigators received photographs supposedly proving the paintings survived. Most were hoaxes. Others led nowhere. The museum offered increasingly massive rewards, millions of dollars for information leading to recovery. Still nothing. The silence became eerie, because major stolen art cases often produce leaks eventually. Someone talks, someone boasts, someone gets caught. But the Gardner paintings remained ghosts, invisible, untouched, lost somewhere beyond reach. The robbery devastated more than the art world. Museum employees carried emotional scars for years. Rickabath became permanently linked to the crime. Public suspicion followed him endlessly. Though never charged, his life became overshadowed by conspiracy theories. Investigators scrutinized every decision he made that night, every movement, every statement. Some believed he was careless. Others believed he was manipulated. A few insisted he knew more than he admitted. But regardless of the truth, the robbery changed his life forever. Meanwhile, curators and historians mourned the missing works like lost relatives. Entire generations grew up knowing the paintings only through photographs. The crime had stolen not merely object, but experiences, moments future visitors would never have. Among all the stolen works, Vermeer's The Concert became legendary. Experts estimate its value alone could exceed $250 million. The painting's rarity makes it almost impossible to calculate. Vermeer created only a tiny number of known works before his death. Each surviving painting is considered priceless. The Concert carried Vermeer's signature mastery of light, the soft glow, the intimate domestic setting, the quiet humanity. And now it was gone, vanished into criminal darkness. Art historians often describe the loss as catastrophic. If the painting still exists, it may be hidden in terrible conditions, rolled up, stored in dampness, damaged by neglect, or perhaps carefully preserved by someone terrified to reveal it. No one knows. One horrifying possibility haunts investigators. What if the artwork no longer exists? Paintings are fragile, especially when stolen by criminals rather than conservation experts. A single mistake can destroy centuries of history. Humidity, heat, improper storage, mold, fire, water damage, folded canvases, even cutting paintings from frames causes trauma. Some experts fear certain works may have deteriorated beyond repair long ago. Others believe criminals may have panicked after realizing the paintings were impossible to sell. Could they have destroyed evidence, burned the canvases, dumped them? Investigators rarely speak openly about this possibility because hope remains central to the case. But privately, many acknowledge the terrifying truth. The paintings may already be gone forever. The Gardner heist transformed into a cultural obsession. Documentaries, books, podcasts, investigative specials, conspiracy theories. Every few years, new headlines emerge promising breakthroughs. Yet the mystery survives. Part of the fascination comes from the contrast. The crime feels almost cinematic. 2 fake police officers, a midnight museum robbery, masterpieces disappearing into darkness. But beneath the mythology lies something deeply tragic. Human civilization creates beauty slowly, sometimes over centuries. Yet destruction can happen in minutes. The thieves spent just over an hour inside the museum and permanently altered art history. In 2013, the FBI made a major announcement. Investigators publicly stated they had identified the thieves. According to federal authorities, the robbery was committed by members of a criminal organization based in the Mid-Atlantic and New England. But there was a problem. Most suspects were dead, and authorities still didn't know where the artwork was. The announcement shocked many observers. How could investigators know who committed the crime, yet still fail to recover the paintings? The FBI insisted the investigation remained active, but critics questioned whether authorities truly possessed definitive answers. Even today, skepticism remains, because without arrests, confessions, or recovered art, uncertainty continues. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum still stands in Boston. Visitors walk through the same galleries the thieves entered in 1990. The same hallways, the same Dutch room, the same empty frames. Security has dramatically improved, but the emotional atmosphere remains unique. People lower their voices near the vacant spaces. They stare, trying to imagine the missing paintings, trying to understand how something so important could simply disappear. The museum continues offering rewards for information, and staff members still hope for recovery, because art theft cases have occasionally ended with miraculous returns. Paintings missing for decades sometimes reappear unexpectedly, hidden in attics, storage units, private collections. There is always a chance. However small, the Gardner heist endures because it represents more than crime. It represents absence, mystery, and human greed colliding with human creativity. The thieves likely wanted money, power, status, but what they stole belonged to everyone. Children who would never see the paintings, historians who would never study them again, visitors who would never stand before them in silence. The robbery transformed masterpieces into myths, and myths rarely die. Some crimes steal money, some crimes steal lives. But on a cold March night in 1990, two men walked into a museum and stole pieces of human history itself. More than 30 years later, the empty frames remain. And somewhere in the darkness, the world's most valuable missing paintings may still be